Well, good evening all in Europe. Welcome to all panelists, Tiernan Brady, Richard Mol and Matteo Di Maio, and of course all the streamers across Europe to watch our interesting discussion that we will have the coming 1.5 hours. 2 weeks ago, International Coming Out Day took place. This is a day with a lot of love, but unfortunately also remains a lot of hatred surrounding it. And an example in the news from a few days ago is the possible implementation to stop LGBT law in Poland that will make gay pride illegal. Because according to the initiators in Poland, homosexual propaganda in the public space is not welcome anymore. Personally, I would like to see a societal development towards a society in which coming out day is unnecessary, because all sexual and gender identities would be equally accepted in the future. I think it's very important. Yet there are some incidents happening in the European society. For example, today there has started a trial in Greece regarding a murder on an LGBTQI plus activist that happened 3 years ago, or a current debate in Vilnius in Lithuania between the police and the municipality of Vilnius regarding keeping a rainbow crossing, yes or no. So as we see from these kind of examples, there's still a need to discuss the situation of human rights versus LGBTQI plus rights, because they are not accepted everywhere across Europe and beyond. Today, we will discuss this current state of human rights versus LGBTQI plus rights, and how the pandemic possibly has influenced this, and how we can work on a better future for the LGBT community regarding human rights. Martina and I will discuss tonight these issues. And to break the ice a little bit, I would like to invite the panelists to introduce themselves shortly, who they are and why are they so passionate about this topic. So first of all, I would like to ask Tiernan Brady to introduce himself and tell us a bit more why he is attending this panel discussion tonight.
Hey, Berber, and hello everybody. I'm attending because you asked me so nicely. That's why I'm here. My name is Tiernan Brady. I'm the global director of inclusion at Clifford Chance, the law firm. But prior to that, I had been in other forms of campaigning. I was the executive director of the Australian Campaign for Marriage Equality, which campaigned up until the public vote, which thankfully, was successful in 2018. And as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not very Australian. So before that, I was the political director of the Irish Referendum in Ireland on marriage equality, which passed in 2015 by almost the exact same percentage, which was kind of weird and spooky. And I had been the policy director of GLEN, what was the Gay and Lesbian Equality Network, or in its original name, the Irish organization working on civil unions, HIV, stigma, but my Limerick connection, as I was telling Berber earlier, was I was actually mayor of my hometown for 2 terms, and had served as director of elections for the then Deputy Prime Minister, Mary Coughlan. Who both of us were ALDI members, and therefore straightly and directly connected into Limerick. So it's a nice combination of both Limerick and ALDI support from this side, and also on the LGBT front.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, we will ask about your experiences later. I would like to welcome the floor to Richard Mol. So hit us away.
Hello. Yes, I'm Richard Mol. I'm a professor of political sociology at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at University College London in the UK. I'm here because my research interests focus primarily on sort of attitudes towards LGBT people in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly the cause of homophobia in particular countries, and what individual social actors can do to counteract some of the homophobic rhetoric that comes from politicians and religious leaders in particular.
Very interesting and also very necessary. Thank you. So last but not least, Matteo, go ahead to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matteo Di Maio. I'm here as a member of Più Europa, which is an Italian liberal and democratic party, I would say with a very strong program on LGBTQI plus issues and human rights in general. For us, this is not like an accessory issue. It's a core issue for every liberal party trying to get some votes today. In the last few years, I've worked with refugees and asylum seekers here in Milan, in Italy. And currently I'm working in the field of political communications, always with a strong focus on liberal values.
Thanks a lot. So now we have a view of who our panelists will be. However, I would like to point out that this event has been brought together by, first of all, Novum organization. So I'd like to give the floor to Sebastian to introduce a bit the organization and why we are here.
Yes, hello, Berber, thank you for introduction. My name is Sebastian Pikla. I run Institute Novum here in Slovenia, and together with European Liberal Forum, also this broader project, which is called Human Rights in 21st Century. And this event is one of the several events which are going on now for the second year. We feel that basic rights are being somehow let's say, attacked by illiberal regimes that are being not respected around as much as they should. And since human rights are one of the cornerstones and actually pillars of European integration, and one of the world's most important values, this is something we need to speak about very seriously and take it into a context now in the beginning or in first half of the 21st century. What new issues, complex issues which are deriving out of technological changes, geostrategic interest, also climate change, and the latest actually health issues with COVID and so on, is posing on the human rights as a value, and how human rights are being transformed and search for new or different answers. And this event is one of those which we feel are the topic we feel is important for liberal understanding of human rights. Actually, until now, focus on previous roundtables was, let's say, for instance, on rule of law, on senior citizens, on artificial intelligence, women's rights, also vaccine solidarity. And I believe that today's topic, human rights for LGBTQI plus, is also extremely important topic which needs to be thoroughly discussed and put into context what is going on in the countries of European Union which are either denying or not respecting the rights of individuals. Once again, Limek and Berber and Martina, thank you very much for accepting this challenge, for preparing this wonderful panel. And I will definitely listen very carefully to what everybody got to say. Let's go on. Thanks.
Thank you, Sebastian, for your kind words. I'm also very curious about all the insights. But first, I would like to give the floor to Šárka, which will say a few welcoming words from the European Liberal Forum.
Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to welcome you to this online event, which is called Human Rights and LGBTQI plus Rights, with a very catchy title, Can Everyone Be Themselves in the 21st Century? I am welcoming you on behalf of the European Liberal Forum. My name is Šárka Prát, and I'm an elected member of this amazing forum. And this forum brings together liberally oriented think tanks, institutions, and foundations from all over Europe and beyond. Together, we are creating a space for dialogue on European integration, liberal policies, ideas, and above all else, human rights and LGBTQI plus rights. Discussions on such topics should be encouraged in the face of current conditions and the rapidly evolving world. The European Liberal Forum is dedicated to respecting all human rights, and since its establishment in 2007, we have made it our mission to work throughout Europe in spreading liberal ideas and giving a voice to all citizens. Maintaining the rights of human beings is therefore a priority for the organization. ELF stands alongside the EU in promoting human rights through liberal and democratic means, and we believe that we all have a role in protecting these universal human rights. Freedom is of the utmost importance to ELF, which has made it their mission to use their platform to help both individuals and groups with maintaining these freedoms. From freedom of expression to freedom of education, movement, and life, all people without discrimination are deserving of these basic rights. And we must always strive to defend these rights, and since its creation, European Liberal Forum has continued to do its due diligence in promoting these rights. ELF has contributed to improving the dignity of Europeans by holding events for the LGBTQI plus community, giving voice to minorities and establishing forums to safeguard human rights in the age of digitalization. Our basic freedoms may now be in jeopardy, however. COVID-19 has created social, economical, and political challenges that we haven't experienced before. Governmental measures are deemed to be violating our fundamental rights, as restrictions were placed on the 4 fundamental freedoms of the EU: freedom of goods, persons, services, and capital within the EU. We, as members of the forum, are concerned with these recent events, and therefore we have established online debates where experts and liberal thinkers are able to discuss and explore our rights and the actions and reactions that have been taken. Even before the rise of COVID, there have been violations of freedom of person, as seen with our LGBTQI plus community. It's a known fact that respect for these rights are lacking, and the EU must implement more measures in securing these basic rights. The EU cannot be a free and liberal entity until all of its citizens are taken care of to the same degree. We believe that respecting human rights is the first step in creating a more open and liberal Europe. The EU must continue to do its part in abiding the treaties and conventions it ratifies. The ELF will continue to strive for our basic freedoms by conducting and hosting forums on human rights in hopes that we can learn from each other. On behalf of the European Liberal Forum, allow me to wish you a pleasant debate, and I firmly believe that the fruitful discussion to which we are accustomed to during our events will be reflected in virtual form. Thank you for having me, and thank you to Novum as well and to Sebastian for inviting me.
Thank you, Šárka, for those inspiring words. So after this welcome from all different parties and the panelists, I would like to dive into the first part of our panel discussion. So first of all, I have just an open question. I would like to invite all 3 panelists to join and maybe even interfere each other and have a lively discussion, because the first topic will be: how is the current status of LGBTQI plus rights across Europe? I understand that everybody has its own expertise, so there will maybe be different countries and examples. But for example, Tiernan can start, because since a few decades there are some equal sex marriages, and you have fought for this, so maybe you can elaborate a bit on this topic, and also what you think from your perspective is the current state of these rights.
I mean, thanks, Barbara. I mean, I think probably the biggest message is it's going in both directions at the same time, which shows how important campaigning is for all of us to start with. That there is nothing inevitable about that things will always go forward. So we have some brilliant results this year. I mean, perhaps one of the most emphatic ones was the Swiss referendum on marriage equality, which happened last month. And a referendum in Switzerland is a very hard thing to win anyway, because you have to win a certain majority of the cantons as well as the country. That vote passed in every single canton in Switzerland, which is just an awesome result. So it shows that there's a huge appetite still for equality, when we're campaigning well. But at the same time, we can see that that's the opposite of what the picture is in other parts of Europe. So there seems to be an unfortunate and invisible dividing line running down the middle of the continent between countries that are going in the right direction. But I might come back to that because they haven't finished. They're just going in the right direction. They're not done. And then countries where obviously there's a significant challenge where LGBT people's lives are being politicized and marginalized for political gain in several other countries across the continent of Europe. And we shouldn't be shy about calling that out. That's what's going on here. This is about people using a minority group for political benefit. So you can see that it's a tale of two cities, is the story used to be, but it's a tale of two continents within one. That kind of has a very clear geographical dividing line. I think in the Western side of it, I think one of the problems is, whilst things are good and going in the right direction, there's a complacency, which means we can sometimes think we don't have to campaign anymore. That it's all okay, that it's, oh, sure, it's all fine, we're sure, aren't you all great? And of course, that's not true, because we can see whether it's for trans people, or whether it's violence on the street for people walking at home anywhere in the Western part of Europe holding hands, that's still a real issue every weekend. And we can see how much trans people are being further marginalized as a group and being used as a political wedge issue. So even in the Western side, there's an awful lot still to do, and an incredibly important reminder, this isn't inevitable, that this isn't just going to happen by itself. I remember when we used to be told all the time, oh, don't worry about LGBT rights, it's a generational thing. In a generation, nobody will think it was an issue at all. But for the people who probably got attacked walking home holding hands across the Western part of Europe last weekend, they weren't being attacked by 60-year-olds. It was 20-year-olds and teenagers. So this generational thing isn't automatic. So I think it's a tale of, ironically, two different directions, but both say the same thing, that progress is not inevitable, that the only way we win is when we know that all of the things we have won are very fragile. And we have only won them because we have campaigned and campaigned and campaigned. And if we stop campaigning, these new baby rights, I mean, we always want to shake ourselves and remind ourselves, we had a couple of thousand years of being treated, on the wrong end of everything, of being marginalized, persecuted, murdered, imprisoned, you name it, for thousands of years. We've only managed to beat that and turn it around and start to turn it around in 30. So these are baby rights. They're so tender, they're so fragile that we can't sit back and think that they'll be okay on their own. We have to just keep going and campaigning and campaigning and campaigning. And whether that's in Poland, whether that's in Belarus, or whether that's in France, it's the same message, no matter what the trend is.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to give the floor to Richard, because you talked about the division between West and Eastern Europe somehow, as Richard introduced himself, that he has, of course, knowledge about the Eastern part of Europe. I would like to invite you about that kind of view and the news that is quite often about Poland and the LGBT free zones, etc. But we hear less about, I will come then to Matteo, also about Italy and the rights. So yeah, Richard, please elaborate a bit on this.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I don't want to give the impression that everything in Eastern Europe is terrible. Just as sort of Tiernan said, not everything in Western Europe is fantastic. Hate crimes in the UK have been sort of on the increase very recently. And there are some sort of signs of progress in Central and Eastern Europe. A bill for equal marriage was going through the Czech Parliament, and activists thought it had a good chance of success. Unfortunately, we've had a change of government, and so it's unlikely to sort of pass through before the new government takes over, and the new government hasn't expressed much interest in picking up this issue. As you said, things in Poland at the political level have been pretty bad. The last presidential election, which was sort of about this time last year, the incumbent president, Andrzej Duda, used homophobia as one of his key campaigning tactics, particularly because he was up against Rafał Trzaskowski, who was the mayor of Warsaw, and had been very supportive of LGBT rights. So sort of homosexuality was used as this sort of bogeyman throughout the election. So don't vote for him, otherwise, they'll be forcing homosexuality onto Poland from outside. You mentioned the LGBT free zones, absolutely, concentrated in the southeast of the country. Their effect, sort of practical effect, was sort of minimal, but the symbolic effect was very powerful, saying that, LGBT Poles are not welcome here, you are not part of our culture, our society. Quite a few of these municipalities have abandoned the LGBT free zones, thanks to the European Commission's withholding of funds for them. And also, so while at the political level things are looking pretty bleak, actually social attitudes towards LGBT have improved quite markedly. Support for same-sex rights in Poland over the past 5 years has sort of increased by sort of 15 to 20%, which is sort of quite a lot. So even within Poland, there's a sort of a very big division between the cities, which is sort of much more liberal, and then the countryside. And so it's really the effect of sort of populist leaders who all seem to use the LGBT community as a scapegoat, as a symbol of the decadence and Western influence that they're trying to get rid of. So we've seen this particularly in Hungary with the recent introduction of its own gay propaganda law, which came into effect in the summer. But again, this was absolutely pure political posturing. I mean, if Orban was worried about the influence of LGBT people on children, he's been in power for 10 years. He could have done something about it before now. So the timing is very important. I mean, it sort of relates to COVID, which we'll be talking about later. But his approval ratings were plummeting because of his handling of COVID, which was extremely bad. And so this has proved to be a very good way to deflect attention, is to find a good scapegoat. Putin did it after the parliamentary elections, which were widely seen to be fraudulent, and it worked like a dream in Russia. So other equally authoritarian politicians can see the benefit of doing this. Although unlike in Russia, Orban has had to confront the European Commission and other European states within the Union, and this is sort of more likely to have an effect on Hungary than it would on Russia, obviously. Although even there, we'll sort of discuss this later. Even there, there's sort of problems associated with sort of outsiders, particularly Westerners, being seen to impose so-called Western values on Hungary. So in general, it's not a particularly rosy picture, but at the level of society, I think social attitudes at that level are sort of what we should be looking for to see signs of sort of hope for the future.
Thank you, Richard. You're running even ahead of several topics, but good to have this image somehow about Western Europe. And then I would like to ask Matteo talk a bit more about the southern part of Europe. Martina elaborated a bit to me about the Italian situation, but could you please, for our viewers, tell us what's going on and what is happening in Italy?
Sure. So if we take into account the division between Western and Eastern countries in Europe, Italy has always been considered part of the Western side. However, on LGBTQI plus rights, I would say that Italy might be considered as the least advanced Western European country, or one of the most advanced in the Eastern part, since we have to fight a lot for any single baby step towards equality. We had a law providing for legalization of same-sex couples and relationships only in 2016, which is absurd considering that we're not talking about marriage equality, we're only talking about civil partnerships. And nowadays, there's a discussion regarding a law sanctioning homophobic and transphobic conducts. So it would actually amend the current criminal code, the Italian criminal code, as well as it would provide for specific diversity-oriented educational paths within public schools. And there's a huge debate regarding this law, which is called the DDL Zan. If we look at this current discussion through European lenses, everything seems so, let's say, vintage, so old-fashioned, because in all the other surrounding states, such as France, Spain, but also if we look at the UK, Ireland, Germany, those laws were approved by vast majorities, not only traditional progressive parties. And in Italy, it seems that everything is slower, taking into account other experiences. And so I would say that Italy is quite in a limbo for LGBT rights, for human rights in general, but specifically on LGBTQI rights. We actually have very progressive cities, and LGBT rights are being respected more and more, even in some other zones of our country. However, politicians seem very shy. Also, progressive politicians, I have to say, they always tend to, be very slow on LGBTQ rights in general.
Well, thanks to all three of you to elaborate on this part. Tiernan, did you want to say something? I thought you were muted.
No, I was nodding.
To elaborate on Matteo's story. Okay, perfect. So going back like 1 year a bit, that has probably, hopefully, some effect of today. The EU launched an EU strategy on LGBTQI equality, issued by the European Parliament as somehow a reaction to what happened in Poland a year ago. And I was wondering if all three of you see from your perspective some effects of this strategy, and has it increased somehow also during the pandemic, maybe the LGBT rights, or up until now there's still not some measurable result? So maybe Richard can start with this, because it was somehow a response to what happened in Poland.
Yeah, so I'm doing a research project at the moment on how populist politicians use homophobia, and we're sort of looking at a number of East European countries, and we wanted to do a sort of a media analysis to look at different themes. And one of the themes was the introduction of the EU's LGBTQI strategy, and it was barely mentioned in the media. It was sort of largely ignored. So I'm not sure what effect it will have on Poland. It depends what the sort of the enforcement mechanisms are. But I mean, my concern would be that it just sort of feeds into this debate that homosexuality is something Western, it's something very liberal that's being forced on us by the EU, unless they have the sort of conditionality that they had in the run-up to accession, I think this will be resisted very strongly at the level of the political level. There are certain aspects of it that, though, I think will be welcomed. Clearly, that sort of funding going directly to activist organizations, and I think that is the best way that change can happen, is from the sort of the level of social movements, because the social movements are Polish. The government can't claim that it's being forced on them. If it's sort of local Polish activists who are seeking change, then they are citizens. Populists will always seek to sort of marginalize, delegitimize the voices of LGBT communities, LGBT activists, but they can't deny that they're Polish. So by sort of supporting financially Polish social movements, then this is sort of one very important way that the EU strategy can help change the situation there.
Okay, thinking about this campaigning, what you mentioned, Tjernan, do you think maybe this strategy has helped the equality laws in Switzerland, or you think it's more about the campaigning that has been locally set up, or did the EU maybe have any role in this with this strategy?
I think, in fairness to the EU, I mean, I'm going to say no, it probably didn't have a big impact on the Swiss vote, in fairness, but I don't think it did. But I do think there's something really important about the institution starting to set standards around this as a region. And that's the beginning of something very powerful. It may not have the huge impact immediately, but it starts to frame decisions, the thousands of decisions that the European Commission and committees and ministerial committees start to take. It now becomes a variable in that thought process, whereas perhaps beforehand it was an enunciated value, but not necessarily fed into the process of how we think things through. So, I mean, I think it's the beginning of something. And I think, for years there was probably great resistance across Europe, because there simply wasn't a consensus that this was the direction we were going. There was not, I think, as the European Court once put it, a preponderance of nations in favor of this. It's not the settled will of the European people. Now, what the EU is clearly doing is it's saying it has enough confidence to believe that it is the settled will of the majority of the people of Europe. And I think that's a very important statement. And like I say, I don't think necessarily has a direct impact on day one in campaigns everywhere. But now we're going to think about how money gets allocated in 5 years' time, on community groups. We think about, all the different processes and decisions and applications that member states will start making to the EU on a whole range of things. And charters have to then come into play, and they start to influence the thought process. And that's what good policy should do. I think change is always a bit of both. Sometimes it's the people pulling the politicians, but and sometimes it's the politicians pulling the people. And there's never a right answer to this. Sometimes it works both ways. I mean, in Ireland, the entire people pulled the political class over the line about passing marriage equality. In America, it had to be done by a court, because the political class simply wasn't willing to do it. So in each country at each moment in time on different aspects of LGBT rights, you have sometimes governments miles ahead of the people. Again, Ireland's such a rich example of this, and I hate using it a lot. When decriminalization happened in Ireland, that was only in the mid-90s, same time as Malta, roughly. You know, so we were the two of the last, what you would call traditional or the older EU members to actually stop gay and bisexual men in particular being criminals. But when that happened, the majority of people in Ireland didn't want decriminalization to happen. So, and people forget this, Ireland became the first country in the world to pass marriage equality by a public vote in 2015. 20 years earlier, the majority of people wanted being gay to remain a crime. So people had a massive change of heart due to good campaigning. But it's an example of sometimes the political class is doing the pushing, and sometimes it's the campaigners. I think this, like all big policies or frameworks, as campaigners we will get out of it what we put into it. It has huge potential to shape how the union engages with people. It has huge potential to influence people as they engage with the European Union. So I think it can only be a good thing. And I think the fact that the European Union had the confidence to do that now, you have to, at a time post-Brexit, when it would have been very easy to go, oh, no, hold on a minute. The UK has just ran out the door. And even though we think that's insane, which I do anyway, even though they've ran out the door, we can't be doing too many bad things now to some of the rest of them for a little while. Let's keep everybody happy, and let's ignore our differences. And they chose very bravely to go, no, we're not going to do that. No, this is right now. We know that there's a couple of European EU member states who are very vociferously anti-LGBT in their policy decisions. And the EU went, no, we're still prepared to be brave. I think that in itself sends a message going, this is important enough for us not to throw it into a drawer and wait for all the dust to settle, from Brexit or whatever other moment of stress is happening, to make sure we're enshrining the rights of LGBT people. So I think it's only a good thing. I think it's a sign of bravery by the union. And I think it's how it plays out is up to us.
Yeah, maybe you can give some best practices to the other countries so they can follow your great Irish example. So we touched also a bit about COVID earlier, and that's, I think, still it's in general a big topic, of course, in current society, but also I think it should have some effects as Richard also said regarding having a scapegoat for political gain, etc. I'm wondering if that happens in other countries as well, and how the three of you think COVID has affected the community, but also specifically the rights of the LGBTQI plus community. So Matteo, could you share with us your thoughts regarding this?
Sure. So, well, I believe that in Italy, as well as pretty much all around the world, COVID-19 has shut down a wide range of social services, networks, and structures that helped specifically vulnerable LGBTQI plus individuals. Let's say, for example, shelters all around Italy welcoming persons who had issues with coming out within their families, had to reduce their services throughout the pandemic. And so that's one big issue. Of course, forcing people to stay a lot within their own houses might have triggered complex situations throughout, especially the first 3 or 4 months of lockdowns and quarantines and so forth. And also another issue is that especially homophobic and transphobic politicians here in Italy used COVID-19 to say that since we are in the middle of a pandemic, there's no time to approve any other law rather than those focused on COVID-19 related issues. And well, I mean, that's quite false in my view. If we look at Germany, for example, so the current government found sometimes to approve a total ban on conversion therapies in Germany, which is an important legal provision for any country. While on the other hand, Italy, in almost 2 years, didn't find, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes to discuss and approve a law against homophobic and transphobic behaviors, both in the House of Representatives and in the Italian Senate. Currently, the discussion on this bill is stuck in the Senate, has been stuck there for like more than 7-8 months, I guess. So it's quite frustrating. Also, let's say the justification of COVID-19 as a pandemic in order to stop any possible advancement in human rights. And
thank you. Maybe Richard, you could also elaborate on this, and Tiernan, please interfere if you have some thoughts. Afterwards, we will talk a bit more with Martina about the future perspective. So, Richard, please.
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, sort of Hungary, the Hungarian leader, Viktor Orbán, used homophobia, the gay propaganda law, to deflect attention from his very bad performance during the COVID crisis. Other East European countries have fared very badly as well. Russia's had a very bad COVID, and so again, the Russian government introduced a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage last summer. Again, that was never on the card, so quite why they felt they needed to do it at that point. It doesn't make sense unless you are thinking that it was to deflect attention from the very poor handling of the COVID crisis by President Putin. Everything that sort of Matteo said, I think applies to East European countries as well. The bill on same-sex marriage in the Czech Republic, it was hoped that it would make much faster progress through the parliament before the elections, which happened sort of earlier this month. But unfortunately, the same sort of reasoning was given as to why focus needed to be applied elsewhere. And also because of the lockdown, it wasn't possible to sort of meet, for LGBT activists to meet with policymakers. I think it's much easier to say no when things are done by Zoom than if you're sort of face-to-face around a table. And then for sort of individual LGBT people more generally, I mean, a lot of people, of young LGBT people, have been sort of forced to spend lockdown with their families, many of whom may not have been sort of welcoming. We've seen increases in domestic violence, either sort of partnership violence or sort of parents to children. We've seen a lot of sort of money obviously spent on dealing with COVID, which meant that other LGBT health and mental health services were either sort of reduced or sort of cancelled. A lot of gender transition surgery was sort of often cancelled, again with the same argumentation that we need to sort of be focusing on COVID and nothing else. And just in general, a number of religious figures in Central and Eastern Europe have blamed COVID on gay people with no sort of proof or sort of logic, but again, this sort of hate speech has increased at the level of very high levels. The Turkish president sort of blamed LGBT people for COVID, and this was sort of picked up in the media in the sort of the neighbouring states in the Balkans. So yes, absolutely, COVID has, I think, made things markedly worse for a lot of LGBT people.
I mean, I think I'm going to try not to repeat anything, because I think both what Matteo and Richard said is really comprehensive. But it's a really important reminder there's always someone who's going to come out of the kitchen to go, it's the gays' fault. Doesn't matter what happens. Whenever there's a crisis, someone comes running out with their hair on fire going, it was LGBT people. And that's a reminder of how shallow some of the support can be for us. That, you know, there's always people out there who will be willing to manipulate crises, to manipulate fear, to marginalize us. So, and COVID was just no different. I mean, I think we're being blamed for climate change. I think I wish we were as powerful as, you know, half of these people thought we were. I'd love that. I don't know what we'd do at the time. But it's a very serious reflection of the fact that in times of crises, the people we think of as crackpots and cranks, the extremes on every side of every argument, on both sides of the argument, have a little bit of, you know, extreme crazy voices and tones, but those really dangerous ones that sit on the fringes, they move to the center in a crisis. And that's what you can see happening in real time, and politicians will help manipulate that. But either way, you know, that there's an inevitability about, you know, whenever something bad happens, someone's going to roll out it must be the gays brigade. And this, unfortunately, was no different. I think Matteo said something really important too, though, as well. I think the gap in us meeting our elected representatives is significantly impactful. I think we have to get back into our parliaments. It is really influential. Our politicians do listen to us by and large. Most of them do when we sit in front of them, when we take them through this, when they can put a face on LGBT equality. And we've had a year and a half where we haven't had that engagement. And Twitter is not the best place to influence politicians. It's probably the worst place. So we need to, you know, get our invites, put on the jackets and put on an old tie occasionally, and head back into Parliament whenever we can and start talking to people.
Thank you for flagging this, Tiernan. I think it's really important, and I think it's a good start actually to the second part that Martina will lead. So I would like to give the floor to Martina, and thank you for this first part and your answers.
Thank you, Berber, and also thanks to our great speakers, because actually they touched all the points that I would like to deepen a bit during this second part of the panel, that is more focused on the practical part and actions that we can do to fight discrimination, and of course to raise awareness on this kind of topics. I really like the insight that you gave about the fact that Eastern Europe and Western Europe have different kind of situation, but there are some situations that we are not always aware of. And it was very important for me as Italian to hear this conversation about Italy, because not everyone is aware of this situation that we have. I think it was very interesting to look at the report that ILGA did on the situation of human rights linked to LGBTQI plus rights. And it was very interesting to me to look at the map and see how Europe was a bit split up, because we had Western Europe that was doing very well and Eastern Europe that was doing a bit less well, let's say. And then we had Italy that was standing out among Western countries as a country that is not very keen to respect LGBT plus rights. So my question was, how can either European or national institutions can do to improve the situation of in these countries where we are well aware of the fact that this discrimination are present, and also in those countries where it's less evident? Do we have some good practices that we can share from taking from other countries? Also, Tiernan already mentioned that we have, fortunately, some good countries that can be taken as an example, or even outside of Europe. And maybe Tiernan can start, and then we will continue with the other speakers.
Hi, Martina. First of all, I mean, I think as I move back into a camera shot there and wander off and disappear into, but I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, no one country will have the same journey as another country on LGBT plus equality. But there's so much to learn from what we've got right and what we've got wrong in different countries, both inside and outside Europe. And I think that's a really important thing for us to not to think another country has all the answers. I have to say, and I'm not going to be mean to when the Irish campaign was on, you know, we had a couple of American campaigners came over and they were very good, but they were, you know, they were here to tell us how to do it. And we were going, you know, no, we're going to be okay here, thanks. And I'm just not sure that, you know, even when we think about, funnily enough, the American messages, pardon me for a minute, I tell this story, every country has its own culture, its own value frame, and you got to connect with that. And that means you'll have a different campaign in each country. So, when, you know, when America talked about LGBT rights, they talk about freedom and love. When they came to Ireland with those messages, we were looking and going, no, that's not going to work here. And we set up focus groups of straight men in their middle ages who were married, and we started talking to them about marriage being about love, and they started to laugh at us. They started to say, I don't know what you mean. Sorry, I was in love before I got married. Marriage ruined my love life. And then we told them marriage was about freedom, and they thought we were insane because marriage is obviously the opposite of freedom, as far as people in Ireland were concerned. But so each country has its own cultural nuance to connect with. And I think that's one of the most important bits that I get, and Richard has made this point and he's right, that we don't want this to be perceived to be someone else's values. It has to be of, for example, Poland. It has to be the most Polish thing in the world. So, and in the early Irish campaign, and again, funny in Australia, one of the pieces of research we did was not to find out what Irish people thought about LGBT people, but to find out what Irish people thought about Irish people. What did it mean? Well, what does it mean to be Irish? And then how can we allow our equality to connect into that value? Rather than sometimes we can be perceived when we campaign poorly as marching into someone else's village and going, you're terrible, your culture's appalling, you need to change everything. And then we wonder why they didn't like us. You're going, well, of course they didn't like you. If someone came to your house and said that, you wouldn't invite them back for dinner. But we campaign like that a lot, when in fact, where I found some of the great connections to avoid that real threat, as that Richard highlighted, is this, you know, it can't be an anti-Polish thing to be for LGBT equality. It has to be the most Polish thing in the world. So that involves listening and connecting to those values. So it will lead you to potentially a different answer than the Irish campaign or the Spanish campaign, but the principle was the same of how you approached it. You connect into your communities. So I think there's tons to learn is the short answer. So I think the connectivity of Europe, both through ILGA, through LIMEC, through the Parliament, you know, and through, you know, events not just like this, but events where we can bring together different campaigners to talk about what's right, what's wrong, when we won, and when we made a total mess of it. We're good at making a mess of it too. But when we've done all of that, I think that networking of campaigners is so important to us if we want to empower people in their own regions to drive the change, because that has to be driven by the people within their regions. But hopefully we have something useful to bring to that table.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I will also want to hear the other speakers. So maybe Richard and then Matteo.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with everything that Tiernan said about the importance of not assuming that sort of what worked in the US or in the UK or Ireland will work in Central and Eastern Europe. The very idea of having a gay pride march was something that was seen as too sort of narrow for a lot of Polish people to get around, that it was that gave the impression that gay people were seeking special rights. So instead, Kraków has developed into a Marsz Równości, sort of the March of Equality, and it's also sort of women's campaigners take part, disability campaigners, ethnic minorities. So it's not just focused on sort of LGBT people. It gives sort of an impression that there's sort of greater solidarity among groups, and it's not just all about sort of LGBT. What Tiernan said about what works in Ireland and the importance of finding that out is also very true in Poland. Given that sort of opposition to homosexuality in Poland is primarily due to the Catholic religion and also to Polish nationalism, two things which are almost mean the same thing. So the campaigners in the Equality March, they made sure that they used a lot of Polish flags to sort of reclaim Polishness for LGBT people. This idea that you can't be gay and Polish, which was sort of promoted by the president. They've sought to sort of challenge that. And they also, one of the Pride marches, they used the theme Love Thy Neighbor. Again, to sort of make a reference to Catholicism or to sort of Christianity. Again, sort of supporting the idea that you can be gay and Catholic, that we share these values, obviously there are passages in the Bible that we don't accept, but we share a lot of these values. This idea that we are somehow outside of your community just because of the people we love is something that we don't agree with. So absolutely, I think this was the sort of one of the main lessons that the Polish LGBT community learnt. But another thing to sort of to bear in mind is that sometimes Pride marches aren't the sort of the way forward. I mean, the Commission and certain Western activists seem to assume that this is absolutely the sort of the best way to sort of increase visibility. But I mean, in Russia, it just made people a target. So there are sort of other ways, and we should listen to again, this is a drum I beat all the time, but we should listen to the locals and ask them what changes they want to be made and how they want to achieve that. Because the first wave of equality legislation, sort of LGBT equality in employment that was sort of forced upon a lot of the new accession states after 2004, I don't think that sort of local LGBT movements were consulted about this. This was decided sort of elsewhere over their heads. So this, I would say, would be the sort of the most important thing to bear in mind, supporting what Tiernan said about the local context, and recognizing that not everything that worked in one country will work in another.
Thank you, Richard. And Matteo, do you have any other suggestions or
yeah,
thoughts
sure.
about this?
So let's say from an Italian point of view, looking at all the other experiences, for example, I believe that a referendum on marriage equality will be technically almost impossible, since because of the Italian constitution, you cannot propose through referendum a new law establishing, let's say, marriage equality rather than abortion, rather than divorce. And in order to go through referendum, that referendum has to abolish, fully abolish or abolish in part a law that already exists. So in order to have marriage equality through referendum, which would be almost impossible, you should go and like cancel a word in one article, a word in another article, so it would be a mess. And probably the Constitutional Court would not allow such referendum. So you have to go through the parliament itself. And I believe that a very successful way of framing LGBTQI rights campaign in Italy is to stress two concepts that are very Italian. First of all is that LGBTQI plus persons and individuals are part of Italian everyday and stereotypical families. We have, I mean, in Italy, family links are super important compared to other countries. So rather than, we have actually tried to involve grandparents and parents in videos, campaign, in order to stress that even all the traditional and very Catholic people, of course, Richard mentioned the influence of Catholic Church in Poland, so I will not mention it for Italy. It would be a whole other seminar. Anyway, of course, you have to stress what's stereotypically Italian. And also, I believe that civil unions since 2016 have had their own influence in, let's say, normalizing the fact that gay couples exist and they want to get married. Of course, civil partnerships are not marriages under a legal perspective. However, seeing couples getting married, participating to TV shows regarding couples getting married, or people just trying, to date on live TV, has been important for the general public. So yes, of course, in Italy, we have to find an Italian way towards marriage equality and any other LGBTQI plus right milestone.
Yeah, I think first of all, the grandparents' videos were amazing because it was very nice and sweet to see these grandmas and grandpas doing all these, saying all these nice things. And this is also what you said before on the fact that it seemed like a generational problem, but it unfortunately is not like this in Italy, but all around Europe and unfortunately the world. We have problems in schools, in middle schools even. So it is a problem that has to be addressed everywhere, not only with grandparents or adults that lived in a different vision. And about that, I think it's interesting to see how as individuals, both part of the LGBT community and also as allies, because, for example, I don't identify as part of the LGBT community, but I identify as an ally because I really, really stress the importance of sustaining and, of course, protecting this kind of rights. And people are always asking me, but why are you doing this? Why are you always fighting for something that is not touching you? And I think it's very important to understand how, as individuals, we can do our part, even if we are not part of the actual community. And do you have any advice to people that are not part of the community but would like to help the cause? Whoever wants to take the floor. Maybe Kiernan.
I went first the last time. Allies are fun. It always struck me the whole way through so many of the campaigns that people always underestimate how influential they are as individuals, and how much we change the spaces that we're in. And whether that's a granny talking about her lesbian granddaughter, or a dad talking about his gay son or gay brother, or those are transformational moments. Because sometimes people struggle as part of their journey towards LGBT equality. Sometimes the first step isn't to go, yeah, I get it, LGBT equality, that's fantastic, they're all awesome people. Sometimes the first step is, oh, I have a granny as well. I can relate to that granny. That's a really interesting one. Like the ad in Italy. I mean, the common thread of connecting to another parent, talking about how you would like to treat all your children, no matter who they are. I mean, in Australia, to tell you the truth, we were how I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. Australia is just bananas about sport, utterly bananas about sport. It's like it's their real religion, I think. So, you know, we were totally naked about about getting as many sports stars as possible to come on board and say why they're for it. And people think, oh, that's celeb campaigning. But funnily enough, I think depending on the country, sports star in Australian context isn't seen as a celeb. They're seen as people who work hard, get paid, you know, and deserve the credit. I think you have to be really careful about that because it doesn't automatically travel, as we've already been talking, to everywhere else. I mean, you pick the wrong celeb and suddenly, you know, they'll do more damage than good. You know, I think we've seen that in, you know, in Australia. I think Kate Blanchett, you know, flew in on a private jet to explain to everyone why LGBT people should get married, and she got destroyed in the media, which was unsurprising, and it didn't help us one tiny little bit. Whereas, you know, an Aussie footballer or an Aussie rugby player, an Aussie cricket player, that really connected. So allies are phenomenally important. They're the connection material, but, you know, all too often between us and building our support base. So the more we can encourage them, the more we can help our allies, and the more we can persuade them that they're how influential they actually are. That, you know, that they're going to be the people who drive change for a lot of groups that we just can't get to. And we have all the evidence in the world of that from successful campaigns. So, you know, bring as many of them on as we can possibly find, to be honest, Martina.
Thank you so much, Tiernan. Do you, Richard, have any other suggestion or thought?
So academics are not the best at offering sort of practical solutions always. We leave that to people like Matteo and Tiernan. But certainly the theories that sort of I sort of read and help develop would suggest that the best way to change people's minds about to make them less homophobic, to make them more sort of welcoming, is through sort of interpersonal contact with other sort of LGBT people, because interpersonal contact makes gay people real. Because in Poland and a lot of East European countries, actually, I'm sure this is true anywhere, if you don't know a gay person, then the only frame of reference you have is what you're being told by your politicians or your priests, or what's being sort of reported in the news. Because an academic in Lithuania did an analysis, and whenever there's a story about LGBT people in Lithuania, even if it's sort of quite an innocuous story, they always use the same sort of images, and it's of a leather-clad bear from the sort of Pride parade in Berlin. And this is the only image that sort of Lithuanians are repeatedly given about gay men. Whereas if you actually meet a sort of a gay person, then these sort of stereotypes are broken down, and you'll see that they're real people. They sort of have the same fears and interests as you do. And so one of the best things I think that sort of allies can do if they have gay friends is just to sort of bring their straight friends and their gay friends together, to sort of foster this contact, to sort of break down stereotypes. And this is why, sort of related to this, why something that Šárka mentioned in her introduction was the importance of freedom of movement, because it's very often by sort of going to different countries, sort of coming into contact with different social norms, different sort of cultures, that you then sort of recognize that that sort of what you've been told in sort of Poland or Russia is not the same as you've been told elsewhere. And, you know, it may not make you change your mind, but at least it makes you realize that there are sort of different views out there, and it may make you sort of question why politicians in your country seek to frame LGBT people as pedophiles, whereas sort of in other countries they're the actual prime minister. So I think sort of making contacts, fostering contacts I think it's the best way to do it. Because as I've read an interesting statistic that in Russia, only 7% of people know a gay person, an LGBT person, whereas in America, that's over 50%. So I think these sort of very low level contacts, interpersonal contacts, are very important.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Matteo, please go.
Yes, so as a person that works within the political communication, so a lot on social media, I would say that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has shown us that nowadays, so Tiernan was talking about celebrities in general. Nowadays, you have to carefully select also influencers. So if you wanna build an online campaign, let's say in favor of marriage equality, and you also have to select those people carefully. They are guiding small or large communities online, and so hopefully if you're able to convince them to use their platform in order to bring forward a positive message, but also the difficult part is that some influencers don't always feel the need to leave the floor to LGBTQI plus persons to explain, to talk about their own experiences and so on and so forth. I believe that I mean, it's important to involve celebrities, but it's also important to find celebrities that are willing to share their visibility and their power and their status in order to advance LGBTQI rights. In particular, if I may stress an aspect regarding trans and non-binary individuals, that's particularly true because gay people and lesbian people are quite mainstream nowadays, even in TV series, movies, and so on and so forth. In Italy, we have gay politicians on the left. We also had some gay politicians on the right. However, particularly on issues relating gender identity, Italian society, but I believe that's true also for other countries inside and outside Europe, citizens are quite reluctant to deal with trans people and non-binary people in general. So I guess that our next step is to normalize also the existence of transgender and non-binary persons, involving them in the discussions that we have on laws regarding their own lives, and in general involving more transgender individuals in the public space and in the public discussion.
Thank you, Matteo. I think that is a very important topic that sometimes, unfortunately, is a bit shadowed by the other conversations on LGBT plus rights, because as you said, like we have gay and lesbians and sometimes bi people portrayed like in a very mainstream way, which is very good because it gives visibility, but at the same time, it doesn't give visibility to a very important part of the community, and this has an effect that is quite important, and it has to be addressed. To conclude, I will ask you a positive message in just one sentence to the people that are following and maybe that will see this live stream a bit later on how really we can address the problem of discrimination and how we can support the LGBTI community. Tiernan?
Come on, that's not fair. Campaigning works. It does. I mean, you have to be smart about it, because if you're serious about something, you should be smart about it. But campaigning is both utterly essential, or we will lose what we have won already, and not to take any of it for granted. As we can see all too often in different countries where things can go backwards just as quickly as they can go forwards. But it works. So don't underestimate yourself. Get involved in campaigns. You know, make LGBT a who, not a what. I mean, as Richard was saying earlier, that's where the show is. When it becomes Martina and Richard and Matteo, the world changes. And that's that's what we need. So get out there and be campaigning. It can be great. It's much easier than you think to do it well. And it's the only thing that has ever created the change we want.
I totally totally agree. Richard or Matteo?
Gosh, one sentence. I suppose what I would sort of encourage is just sort of keep traveling, keep meeting as many different types of people. Encourage your friends to travel. Bring your gay friends and your straight friends together. Foster as many sort of interpersonal contacts across boundaries of gender, sexuality, nationality. This is the best way. Get people talking. Absolutely. So yes. So he said very incoherently. So.
Thank you very much, Richard and Matteo.
Well, I would say that you're always going to find someone who's homophobic or transphobic, and he or she is very convinced about that. However, in my experience, the majority of people is just a bit ignorant on the topic. So, of course, you're not obliged to be like a professor lecturing people around the street on LGBTQI plus rights. However, in my view, if you manage to keep a civil and polite conversation on the topic, you will find, surprisingly, that a lot of people are on your side as well. And it's just a matter of framing the issue properly. So don't give up.
I think that everything you said was very insightful, and I really hope that it will give the same good vibes to think about and to reflect on these kind of problems and processes that we have everywhere, unfortunately, and especially it will give people more interest in being involved and also take part in this kind of fight to discriminations and homophobic and transphobic behaviors, because as we wanted to remark, it's not only a problem of someone that is part of the community, but is something that we can really address all together, and we have to address all together. I think if there are no questions from the people that are following us, we can wrap here. And I will really like to thank everyone that was following us, and especially our great speakers that gave us incredible insights and thoughts, their opinions. And I want to thank again Richard from the University College of London, and Tiernan from Clifford Chance, and to us, and also to the people that were following us. So thanks a lot for the work that we have done, and I really hope that you have enjoyed the conversation as I did, because it was very insightful. And I thank you again for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Martina.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, and have a very nice evening.